My name is Matthew Clapper. I live in Hudson, Ohio. I'm a attorney registered with the Bar of the state of Ohio. I currently practice in Cleveland, and I'm I guess a homeowner. I am married. I have 3 children, and I've recently become interested in politics as I guess as the threat of the liberties that our country is famous for have started to erode to the degree that it's difficult to claim that we're citizens of a free country anymore. So I guess that's my motivation, is to try and get involved in political movements to help return us to a nation of laws where the government obeys the laws as well as the citizenry, and to help fulfill that promise of a free nation, not just for ourselves but our own posterity down the line. It's more important, I think, for citizens to consider the question, what is the proper role of government? What is just to force people to do against their will, than it is to pick the Democrat or pick the Republican. That is such a minor impact on government. It's much more important for us as a population to determine what the proper scope of our government is, what the proper scope of government action is, what it's just to force people to do, what it is moral to force people to do, because that, I think, is the ultimate symptom. We're not slipping into socialism because Obama and the Democrats are in. We're slipping into socialism because we've lost or we no longer have the principles that we used to have, which formed our moral determination of what the proper role is to force other people to do. So we now have a determination that's moral to force this group of people to pay for this group of people, or for this group of people to pay for this group of people. And if a group of people think that's moral, okay, but they have to understand, I don't think people understand the consequences of doing that. And particularly the consequences of picking this group over here and saying, okay, we're going to use you as a proxy to force this guy to pay for this guy. Well, who do you think tends to get control over government? Well, in my reading of history, it tends to be the very people that have the money or have the thing that you're trying to get, use your government to get from them, who end up having the control and using it to oppress you. So it's the double-edged sword to create government in order to use government to steal other people's money to make you more prosperous, because the people who you are targeting, their incentive is going to be to use it to turn that government around and oppress you. So why play that game? Go back to constitutional government, look at the principles of government that the founders of our federal constitution, look at the political philosophies that they used. Their basis for government was to compensate for harm, and to, whether it be harm to property or harm to person. I think that's mostly the Lockean model. And the federal government, they look to provide a common defense, to facilitate, really to regulate, to keep regular trade between the states, so that states wouldn't erect trade barriers and you wouldn't have trade wars among the states. To provide for maritime law, a relatively few number of things. Now, we can kind of transition and give the federal government a little bit more scope, based on certain circumstances, but it should be within the confines of the federal constitution, so it's legitimate, all right, so that the federal government at least is acting within the law. Or we should amend the Constitution, which is why that provision is there, which we've done. But to ignore the Constitution is to have a government that believes it has no limit, to believe it is not subject to the laws that it writes, and in many cases it acts, in contravention to the laws that it writes, and it leads to a breakdown of the rule of law. And if you believe in the rule of law, if you believe that anarchy is a bad thing, you can't have a government that ignores its laws. By definition, that is an anarchical state. You know, whether it's people ignoring the law or whether it's the government ignoring the law, you have an anarchical state, right? You have a breakdown of the rule of law. And I would argue that the worst case is when the government ignores the laws. You know, there was a great study, well, not a great study, I guess it was a enlightening study done by a professor at the University of Hawaii. And you can probably search it on an internet search. I forget the name of the professor, but it was, he did research on what the cause of non-natural human deaths were. So any death that did not result from old age or illness or something like that. And, you know, generally we tend to think, well, you know, murders and, you know, and war, right? Murders and war, those are the big ones, you know. Countries going at it, dropping bombs on each other. And it turns out that, I think, if I remember correctly, war was a big one. It was the number 2. What was the number 1? 10 times as many people in the 20th century were killed, murdered by their own government than were killed by a foreign government in all the wars of all the world combined in the 20th century. 10 times as many people were murdered by their own government in the 20th century as all wars that the world fought in that same period combined, according to this guy's research. So the biggest threat is a government out of control. People talk about anarchy and they show pictures of, you know, people lighting fires in Detroit on, what is that, Halloween or something like that, as the poster scene, I guess, for anarchy. But I would say the poster scene for danger as a result of anarchy is a government out of control that has no respect for its population and is willing to eliminate them at will to meet the expediency of the state. And this researcher's work shows the level of the danger. You know, far worse than any war that we've fought. The worst of the wars we've fought in human history is a government that has no respect for its population, and that's what's at risk. I'm not saying that the government's out there doing, but that's what's at risk when we allow the government to ignore the law. And we know just by looking at other governments throughout history that as they start to go bankrupt, they start to thrash about. You know, they try and pull resources, pull money, pull property wherever they can to continue their credit line. And you know, that combination here in the United States right now of the government ignoring the laws that are designed to restrain it and, you know, going bankrupt or risking bankruptcy. Right now I think our national debt, our current national debt is coming close to parity with our reported nation's GDP. You know, we risk this state bankruptcy, federal bankruptcy. I don't know how real or imminent the bankruptcy is, but certainly it's real. It's a real threat, even if it's small. It's definitely a real threat. And given the scope of the danger of a bankrupt nation that, like I said, ignores the rights of its citizens and ignores the law intended to protect its citizens, that is a danger that we should work very hard to avoid. And the start is to use the states to claw back some of the power to prevent the federal government from being able to enforce its will upon us in a manner that doesn't comport with the laws governing the federal government in this case. And so the Healthcare Freedom Amendment that the Ohio Project is sponsoring is, in the narrow scope of health care, I think is a great idea. And also in the macroscopic scope of our federalist system of government, where there's shared power between the federal and the state governments, I think it's a great idea there. I think there's a lot of needs that are served by this amendment and the venue through which it's being pursued.